What I want to show you is how I would approach mixing a rock song, and it's one I've written recently, and it's basically 13 tracks of the main elements that you would need for a modern rock song. And I've got a couple of acoustic guitars, an electric rhythm guitar, some Rhodes keyboards, and lead, bass, overheads, snare, kick, and 2 vocal tracks. And the overheads part is actually just a stereo output from a drum machine that I've isolated down to the cymbals and the toms, and I've also isolated the snare and the kick, so they've been recorded onto separate tracks. And the stick track is for the quieter solo, where I use the stick instead of the snare. So it's unprocessed at the moment, there's no effects plugins, so I'll just play it back to you. And so it sounds fairly flat, and there's not a lot of impact there. That's because I haven't used any equalization or any compression, and everything is mixed at the same level. So generally, when you're starting a mix, you will try and emphasize certain elements to give the song a certain feel, and also you might want certain elements to have their own place, and you might want other elements to blend together. For instance, the bass and drums and guitar rhythm parts, I tend to like them to work together instead of having completely isolated sounding rhythm section. So we'll start with the rhythm section, which is what I usually do, which is the kick, snare, overheads, bass, and rhythm guitar parts, and then I'll start adding vocals and other miscellaneous things. So everything else has volume set to 0, and I'll start playback, which is going to loop over a section that sort of incorporates pretty much everything except for the guitar solo, and there's nothing there at the moment. So we'll bring up the kick, and at the moment the kick is hitting at around -5 decibels, which is probably pretty loud. So you need to leave room for everything. There's the snare and overheads. I like to keep the cymbals fairly quiet, that they shouldn't really be overpowering, but everything is up to you. I'm just showing you what I would do, what my basic approach is, and you might be able to get ideas to do things your own way from this. Bass is something that I usually can't decide how to mix it straight away. It can sometimes be quiet and just there in the background so that you know that there's a bass element in the song, and sometimes you want the bass to be up the front and really driving the song. But in this case, I think the electric guitar is going to drive this rhythm section, so I'll just move across so you can see that where I'm mixing. It's a really fuzzy guitar that was directly injected into the mixer through a Sans amp, and I have a fuzz pedal on there as well. Now at the moment everything is pretty much in its own space. There's no need to equalize for separation reasons, but eventually we're going to have to equalize anyway to give things more of a gel together. And I haven't added the other guitars yet, so there's also a rhythm acoustic guitar over here, which is kind of a weird sounding acoustic, but that was directly plugged in as well through the Sans amp into the sound card, and that had the distortion on it going in and the phaser, so that's actually stuck that way. There's no plugins on it. And there's also another acoustic. Now I've panned those two guitars left and right to full, and that'll keep them away from the vocal and keep them away from the other elements of the rhythm track. So I'll just de-solo that. Now, because I want the electric guitar to be focus at the moment, I'm going to keep the acoustic guitars a lot lower, so they're just sitting there. You can hear them, but they're not at the forefront. Now the electric guitar cuts through a lot better anyway, so it's not really a problem with the leveling there. Now I'm going to bring in the vocal, and straight away you'll hear the vocal will have trouble with this backing track. Right, you can hear the vocal, but it hasn't really got place of its own there. It's just it sounds like it's about the same level as the electric guitar. So I'm going to leave that vocal at that level at the moment, and then I'm going to equalize the rhythm, the electric rhythm guitar. So I'm using Reaper. I'll use the equalizer that came with Reaper, and I'm going to start at the low end of the guitar and make that band a high pass filter. And what the high pass filter does is only lets things above, frequencies above that cutoff point through. So if we move you can see better now. I've got the high pass filter set to about, I'll set it to around about 150 as the center of the cutoff curve. You can also sharpen the curve a bit. Now the guitar has more of a place to sit without, it's in its own guitar range, but it's still competing with the vocal. So we can cut out some mid frequencies there and just close the bandwidth up a little bit. You can still hear the rhythm guitar, but it's not competing with the vocals as much. I'll leave that for now. But another trick that you can try if the guitar's competing is to duplicate the guitar track. So now we have two guitar tracks, identical, and you pan them left and right. And because I duplicated them, it's also got the same equalizer settings, same plugins, everything's identical. If we go back to the vocal, but when the loop wraps around, we'll hear